Welcome back to the live stream. Today we're going to be talking about the Keynesian multiplier. It's got a deep history, probably the first macroeconomic model that's been formalized by many Hicks, Samuelson, Phillips, etc. We're going to dig into that today. Stay tuned.
You are now relearning economics.
How are you guys doing today? So, I want to get into the questions right away. Steve's on a plane gallivanting across Europe. So I don't know if he's going to show up. Mike is just finishing a class. So he'll show up, momentarily. So I kind of want to save the questions about the multiplier. I don't want to start describing it myself. Here's the thing. I love teachers. And by extension, I love professors that dedicate their lives to teaching young people. Um, and I have a really good concept of macroeconomics, but sometimes I butcher it when I describe it because I get a little bit too technical and I don't simplify it enough. And so that's why I really want to get Mike's opinions on the multiplier itself. I can say it was really the first macroeconomic model. So it's derived directly from Keynes' general theory. Um, and he wrote about it in many chapters, right? You've got your consumption function, or the propensity to consume, your inducement to invest, etc., etc. Um, Now, he didn't really fully, in my opinion, reading the book, he didn't really formalize it, the model itself. You had people like Hicks come along and do a more formal model, Samuelson as well, Bill Phillips as well. I think Harad got in there as well. So there's been many renditions of it over time. It's not micro founded, for one, right? So you're getting macro definitions from macro itself. And that's important. I decided that okay, I want to I was flipping through the general theory yesterday, and I'm like, you know what, I want to do my own rendition of the model, right, and prepare it for today's stream, which I do have. So I did it, worked at it, and by the end of it, I realized I basically created like a Hicks Samuelson accelerator multiplier model, just in continuous time with ordinary differential equations. And obviously, Hicks was working in difference equations and discrete time. But it's still a fascinating model, but it highlighted some issues, some causal issues, I would call them, with it. And we're going to dig into that as well. Let's see what's going on in the chat before we go any further. Hello, chatters. How are you doing? Oh, there's people. 3 tiers for the teachers. Now, as for, econ teachers, some are good, some are bad. But I I harp on, academic economics a lot, but I do appreciate the people that go in and try to teach it, both mainstream and heterodox, right? That's a tough job to inspire people, right? So credit where credit's due, for sure. So if you hear me harping on the academic economic, profession, it's not really against any individuals per se, although there are some that are questionable. It's more just about the holistic mainstream approach. Who else do we got kicking around here? Graham. Graham. There we go. Having troubles with the buttons. Graham's in the house. Well, Hinton in the house, or in the house. We got Tony Wilson. Oh, the always adversarial Tony Wilson's greeting from Briz, Vegas. Australia. That's got to be. Oh, okay. Australia. Gotcha, buddy. Gotcha. First super chat. So my channel was monetized last night. There's two levels of monetization. Thank you, Graham. You are literally the first person to send me a super chat. So last night it was monetized. There's two levels of monetization. So you get your 1,000 subscribers. I've got 3,000 something. And then you need 3,000 hours of view time within a 1 year, 12-month period. And you get access to like the super chats and like subscriptions to your channel. So I have a lot of like system dynamic tutorial videos that I took down that this channel started as modeling with Minsky. So I think I'm going to have because I put those up on my Patreon. But a lot of people are just my YouTube followers. So I might do a subscription service to those tutorial videos. Then at 4,000 hours, that's when you get into ad revenue. So if you see the ads on YouTube, that's when I get a cut of those revenues. So that, I guess, is the next step. But anyways, Graham, congratulations. You are the first super chatter. Greetings from Hungary. God, we're like the United Nations here. Greetings from Hungary. Hungary, I'm thinking Prague's in Hungary, right? Tony. Now, Tony, I did this an hour later just for you. So it's instead of 3 in the morning, it's now 4 in the morning. And I actually did it later so Mike can jump on here after he's done teaching. It's a little bit tough because he's literally done at the top of the hour when we started the live stream. So he's got to transition, and then Steve bailed on me. So my buddy Steve, it's like you're going to like a football game, and you buy tickets for your friend as well, and then he bounces on you in the last minute, and you're only like you're in a section, and you got your friend's seats beside you. They're empty. You're willing to just call somebody over so you don't look like a loner, so you can cheer for your team. It's not here. So that's unfortunate. I guess we can kind of, go to the first questions and kind of kick this off. Okay, I want to make sure I catch everybody. Greetings from Germany. Wow, what a diverse crowd I am blessed to have on Twitter X, YouTube, my Patreon. A lot of people are stuck, with regional followers. Doesn't matter what the content matter is, but I have met and in person or online people from around the world with great diversity, really great diversity, and it's great to get the perspective of regions that are far away from you because we are all susceptible um to living in our own echo chambers, our own little boxes. And when you go outside of that box, I think that's really important. Frank's in the house. Fractional reserve multiplier versus collateral based credit expansion multiplier. Boy, the field is just coming up with multipliers in every which way. Frank, I'm glad you're here live. It's good to see you. What can we do for questions? So until Mike rolls in, for you, if you're not like, if you're new to what the accelerator is, what the multiplier is, what it is in Keynesian economics, basically it just says Keynes basically said that there's deficient demand at times in the economy, not always, but at times during slumps. And then he advocated that the government can step in, right, spend in money to the economy, and that creates a multiplier effect. Now, on the surface of it, it sounds reasonable. It's far more nuanced than that, right? But essentially, there is an element to absolute truth to that. You can do it mathematically, you can look at it empirically, but it is just a simplification of what actually happened. So Keynes's concept is you had like the propensity to consume. So, and he was very linear in his approach, and I'm not. And I've built a model here, and we'll show it in a little bit. But you have the propensity to consume, and if you vary that, you're obviously going to get more or less demand. You have like things like the inducement to invest, right? So one would postulate that if you invest more, you're going to create more supply, and then you're going to have more demand. And this model I'm about to show you, it's more nuanced than that, and it's actually quite interesting. And the reason why all of this is going on, why we're doing this topic today, is I put out a tweet on my Twitter X account, and it was Jay Forrester saying that you can't tinker with one part of the system and expect to generate a linear result to the rest of the system, right? That's a fool's errand. And he used some clever quote about painting a car and saying you can't paint a car and increase the performance of it. And we do have Mike in the house, and I'll bring him on in a sec. And of course, I got pushback, right? So a lot of people, when I put Jay Forrester quotes out there, because he's not an economist, even like my heterodox friends on Twitter are like, what's he talking about? That is a stupid statement. They don't realize that his quotes are coming from a complex, nonlinear system dynamic point of view, right? And I'm going to bring on Mike, and we're going to address that right now, I think, just to, because that's where this specific episode came from, right? Was from that quote. And I decided to use the accelerator multiplier model, Keynes's, Hicks, Samuelson, whoever you want to really give credit to, for it, to show, if I used a dynamic version, so a continuous time version, that if I tinker with one part of the system, it's not going to give me the results I instantly expect. But let's bring on Mr. Mike Rad Zicky. How you doing, Mike?
Pretty good. Just got out of class.
That's good. So I picked a rather historical topic today, and I've been lining up questions. And with the anticipation that we'd start with Steve. He's gallivanting Europe, catching planes, right? And so I've been trapped here for 10 minutes trying to be an historian of economics. I'm a good modeler. You've seen it. Steve's seen it. But, history, you guys trump me in a million different ways. And you describe history, economic school of thought history, far more eloquently than I could. Now, I was just telling everybody, this all came from a quote I posted from Jay Forrester yesterday, and verbatim here, he basically said you can't change the performance of a car simply by painting it. And of course, that stirred up a lot of replies saying, well, that's foolish. What about changing the engine, et cetera, et cetera. And so I had to articulate to these people that replied, well, he's actually speaking from a complex system perspective, i.e., you can't vary or try to optimize one parameter in your model and expect some linear achievement in the rest of it. And I decided, okay, well, this is going to be good topic matter, but I got to kind of push Jay Forrester to the side here and make it a little more economic. And I thought, well, let's use a basic model. And I thought, well, let's use the Keynesian accelerator multiplier model. Many different renditions of it across time. Hicks, Samuelson, Bill Phillips. I think Harrod got into the mix. So I decided, okay, I'll flip through the general theory pages. I'm going to create my own. I'm going to be unique. And about 2 hours into it, I got to the end, created a continuous time model, and realized it was basically a Hicks-Samuelson accelerator multiplier model. I had achieved no innovations other than it uses ordinary differential equations, and it's continuous, and we'll show it here in a bit. But I want you to describe, people that are new to what this multiplier is, how it could be the first macroeconomic model in history, considering Keynes is kind of the birth of macroeconomics in some ways. Kind of describe its origins, and maybe some of the people that really formalized it after Keynes, maybe Hicks, Samuelson, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Well, it's called the Keynesian Multiplier, but it probably shouldn't be in some sense because it was really invented by Richard Kahn, and he was asked by Keynes to go ahead and figure out the details of the multiplier. So I'm not sure Keynes thought about it conceptually and set Richard Kahn out to find the details, but that's apparently what happened. So in some sense, it should be the Kahnian multiplier. Of course, Michael Kletsky, several years before, had produced a mathematical model that had a multiplier process in it. So maybe it should be the Kletsky multiplier. And some others have said it's, I think Vixel had done something previous to Keynes and what have you. Nevertheless, Keynes popularized it irrespective of who actually had the initial idea. But at least in the standard representation, you have in a multiplier model, you have a positive feedback loop, a self-reinforcing process, whereby when the household sector receives income and spends it, it generates more national income, more GDP, more orders for stuff, and hence they can spend even more. The process does not go on forever in a traditional system or Keynesian system, orthodox Keynesian system, because when supply and demand are equal, when the multiplier process ignites demand and supply catches up, you go back into an equilibrium in orthodox Keynesian. So, positive loops generate growth in principle forever, but the need to balance supply and demand ends the multiplier process. And there's a similar process called the accelerator running through the business community. That more expected demand leads to the need for more capital, which triggers more investment. And GDP is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So it generates a greater GDP, suggesting a need for more capital. But again, when capital is at its desired level, desired meaning what should meet expected demand, the process shuts off. So any of your traditional multiplier accelerator models do that. Post-Keynesians kind of object to that sort of rendition, but that's the standard textbook explanation. So.
I'm muted. I just said a really nice thing, and I asked you, Mike, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? And I'm thinking, oh, maybe his computer's broken. Okay, so what I was saying is basically the model that I will show here when we get to those relevant questions is an accelerator type model, and we'll get into that. But I think the next relevant question, just to keep the, it started right from the basics, is what was Keynes' purpose when he described this in the general theory? What problem was he trying to solve? And just, give a basic understanding so we know the exact concept of this accelerator / multiplier. Like, so my model is an accelerator multiplier model. But I think in the book, in the general theory, he wasn't really talking about the acceleration process. More so, he's talking about the multiplier process. So maybe give a description there what he was talking about.
Well, the general theory was written by Keynes from 1930 to 1936 with the intention of explaining why are we in the Great Depression and how are we going to get out of it. The fact that there was an economic downturn wasn't terribly surprising. I'm not sure we can hear one another here.
I can hear you.
Okay, because I can't hear you. I mean, I can hear you off and on. So
You are a little bit glitchy, your camera, like, so you're coming in a little bit. I'll look at your signal here. I used to tell me what a person's signal was. Guess I've stopped doing that. I can hear your audio fine when you talk, Mike. So if you want to just carry on, and maybe after this question, just log in and log off, and just give your synapses here. Your audio is coming through fine.
yeah. So and the audio and the visual are not synchronized, so I'm going to have to log in and out. But so anyway, he's trying to explain why the Great Depression was happening and how do you get out of it. In other words, the cyclical downturn. He wasn't worried about growth, which would be more investment and plant and equipment and, the long run. The short run in economics is when plant and equipment is fixed, and the long run is when both labor and capital can vary. So we're in the ditch. How do we get out? And the fact that we were in the ditch wasn't terribly surprising. Keynes and the economists of the day were aware that economies go up and down, but the ditch seemed to be ongoing. Like the system wasn't recovering. And the traditional explanation was that, well, if you have an oversupply of something, if you have an oversupply of apples, the price of apples will fall until the market clears. Well, we have an overabundance of labor, so the price of labor, wages, should fall to clear the market. And that might be true for an individual labor market for, newspapers or something, but not for the economy in the aggregate. There's a difference between the behavior of a part of the system and the behavior of the whole system. And it's the fallacy of composition, Keynes said. It's a logical fallacy if you think the sum of the macroeconomy is the sum of the behavior of the parts of the economy. Just add them up. So if you think the behavior of the whole economy is the same as the behavior of an individual firm or household or something, you're making a logical fallacy, right? So he was saying, okay, there's been a downturn here in labor unemployment. So if you're following the apples example, the price of labor should fall until the market clears. But he said, if that doesn't seem right, because if wages fall, there's going to be even less demand for stuff. and then there's going to be even less of a need for labor. So that can't be right. That can't be the correct solution or explanation. So he was trying to think of a different way of approaching the problem. And of course, back before he wrote, there was just economics. There wasn't micro and macro, but the economists of the day were kind of evaluating the Great Depression through what we would call microeconomics today. So Keynes thought about, this idea that the spending process could trigger sort of dominoes falling. If the economy's in the ditch and people are unemployed, and you put some of them back to work. So the classic examples from the U.S. were Hoover Dam in the 1930s or the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco in the 1930s. And the government spends to build the bridge. They put all these unemployed construction workers to work, and they get a paycheck and spend it. They save some of it, but they spend it on whatever, haircuts and T-shirts, which now puts barbers and T-shirt makers back to work. And they draw paychecks and they spend them. They save some of it, but they spend some of it on shoelaces and fountain pens. It puts those people back to work. And there's this multiplier process that unfolds. So the initial shove to the economy from the government spending, let's build Hoover Dam, is called pump priming. The old crank pumps where you had to create a vacuum to get the thing going. So you put water in the pump to create a vacuum so it could pump water. And it kicked off this multiplier effect, right? It eventually petered out. It didn't go on forever, as I mentioned earlier. But and he said that would start to lift the economy out of the ditch and put people back to work.
Why was it such, at the time, why was it such a radical idea that spending was causing income and obviously was a boost for the economy? Why was that a radical idea from the classical thinking of the time? Because we didn't really have neoclassical economics, it was just kind of forming at that point. It wasn't really established, oh, this is neoclassical and this is Keynesian. So I'm more speaking, why was that radically different from classical
Well,
thinking of that time?
so Keynes dedicated the general theory to his fellow economists. He could write for the common man and woman. In fact, he did that in the Times of London and what have you. But the general theory was dedicated to his fellow economists. And he said, I'm going to categorize any economist who precedes me and believes that Say's law is true as a classical economist. And I'm going to show that the classicals are wrong. Their explanation for things is wrong. And I'm going to offer something new, the Keynesian revolution. So Say's law said, hey, if companies make $100 worth of goods and services, they generate $100 worth of income that they can then pay to the land, labor, capital, and banking system in form of wages, rent, interest, and profits for their being used in the production process. And then those people, the bankers, workers, capitalists, what have you, landlords would spend the money to buy the $100 worth of goods and services. So there never would be a deficiency of aggregate demand. And then someone said, well, what about saving? If $100 worth of wages, interest, profit, and rent were generated, but they only spent 90, wouldn't $10 cause a leakage from the system? And then firms wouldn't sell all their stuff. They'd lay people off. And it's like, no. The saving goes into the loanable funds market and is borrowed by companies who will then buy the remaining $10 worth of goods and services. So Say's law was preserved. Keynes kind of said, using that mindset, if you will, Say's law, that the decision for the firms in the loanable funds market to borrow and invest, there's kind of a smearing together, I guess, in the aggregate of investment goods and household goods, is not determined by saving, it's determined by animal spirits. So if animal spirits disappear, there's going to be there won't be a desire to borrow and produce investment goods, plant and equipment, because there's pessimism in the market. So the autopilot will not work properly. The market system for loanable funds won't save the day, not necessarily. So what's the solution? In some sense, government spending then is the thing that restores spending in the system, right? And to close the loop. So, of course, in that era, laissez-faire was the philosophy of the day. The government should not be getting involved in the economy. It should provide the environment, the playing field for the economic game. It should provide infrastructure, national security, a judicial system to adjudicate disputes, a money supply. So it should provide the playing field, and for that matter, referees and umpires for the game, the courts, to make sure everybody's playing by the rules, but it shouldn't be getting involved in the game. And Keynes was saying, no, because animal spirits can disappear like that. The business community doesn't want to necessarily invest. There'll be a deficiency in spending. And the only entity that has the wherewithal and the mandate to fix things in the aggregate is the state. So the government does have to get into the game. And of course, at that time, there was the Russian Revolution had happened, and you're approaching the Cold War and communism and all that stuff. So the idea that the government should be involved sounded like a communist thing, some kind of commie thing. In fact, I have not here, I'm at my school office, in my home office, I have a pamphlet called Keynes at Harvard that was circulated in the 1950s, where alumni from Harvard's economics program were outraged that Harvard, through Alvin Hansen, was becoming a Keynesian shop. And they tried to discredit Keynes by trumping up all sorts of ridiculous things and printing it up and circulating among alumni and administrators and what have you, because it was that was the Cold War, right? They think it's some communist thing that is soiling the capitalist system. And Keynes would always say, hey, I'm not trying to overthrow the capitalist system. I'm trying to save it because it's volatile. Investment spending, when it tanks, rips the whole system down.
Yeah, he wrote a piece called "Am I a Liberal?" It's in his Persuasions to
Essays of
it's
Persuasion.
yeah. And in it, he describes himself as a British liberal, so it's a little bit different from an Americanized liberal. But and then I think the whole communism rhetoric that's often used is, he has a passage, I think it was in the General Theory, where he talks about the socialization of investment.
Yes.
And people really just jumped on that to saying,
Yes.
well, he's a socialist, he's a communist. But if you read, and I think an excellent book for anybody to get, the version of the General Theory, at the back of my book has those essays of persuasion. What's the title of it again?
I think it's Essays in Persuasion. I think.
In Persuasion. And so it's just a lot of little essays that you can read. And Am I a Liberal is one of them. I'm going to bring up the model now, what I have, Mike. So, and you're allowed to critique it because I put it together in a few hours. But I think it's a generalization of Hicks and Samuelson.
So while you're doing that, I'm going to log off and log back in, if that's okay.
Yeah, do that, Mike. And let me bring this up. I'll take away the chat. Sorry, there's a lot of buttons here I got to press, guys. Button masher. Let's make this big. So when Mike gets back, let's take this logo down too. We don't want to interfere with this eloquent causal loop diagram that I have here. And I think Mike's back. We'll see how his connection is now. Mike, say something just so we can.
From my end, it's fixed. So.
Oh yeah, that's super good. Okay, I'm going to maximize the screen again. So Mike, basically what I have here is kind of a Hicks version of the model, and I made sure just to kind of do the feedback loops because I thought that was important. So Y is obviously output, C is consumption, I is investment, K is the capital stock, and then we have like beta, which in this model is the propensity to consume, and then I have some halftime constants which are donated by tau, basically lags in the model. You'll see that tau subscript I is a red variable. That's kind of my trigger in the model for a shock. So basically, I'm triggering faster investment if we want to run the trigger. Now, Mike, when I was building this model, I realized the only way I could really convert the original kind of Hicks equations was to make output a stock, which is very counterintuitive, and consumption a stock, which is very counterintuitive. And I could keep I as a flow, and obviously K is a stock, which is proper. Causally, that causes me concern. So if I were to start from a system dynamic point of view, I wouldn't really be defining those variables as what they are, but it works, it runs, and when I added dimensions to it, it's all dimensionally consistent. It works out, but I don't know if I would approach it from a starting point this way. It's really just a conversion from difference equations to ordinary differential equations. And so, Mike, you might see something there and say, well, I've got a way better continuous time model where I avoid it using stocks as a flow. But I'll run it nonetheless. So without a shock, this model And I'll speed it up just to get to the end of the point, arrives at equilibrium where supply equals demand. And there's nothing really fancy there. There's a little bit of dynamics at the beginning. If I add a shock to it, and so now if I add the shock, I'm lowering the value of tau subscript I, which is the capital investment time, basically how fast people invest and react to new demand in the model. And this was a point that I was going to try to make on Jay Forster's quote saying, well, you can't just paint the car and expect better performance. And so if we run this version, there's the shock. We find, okay, we thought if we invest faster, it's going to create more supply, then we'll have more demand, and the economy will settle at a higher equilibrium. What actually happened is it created instability. So now, as soon as we do more investment, we have less supply. So the dotted purple line, if it's below the horizontal black dotted line, that means there's a gap in supply. So there's less supply than there is demand. And then when it shoots above, there is more demand than there, or pardon me, there's more supply than there is demand. And obviously that would be problematic in an aggregate model. I'll make this model available on my Patreon after the show for everybody. But essentially, this is my interpretation of the accelerator multiplier model in a kind of a Hicksian Samuelson type way, just in continuous time. I don't know, Mike, if you have any thoughts on the specific model or questions that you're seeing on the screen.
Well, so first of all, I do a lot of this in my classes where I take a famous model and I replicate it exactly in system dynamics. And when you want to, so I'll take a model presented statically. I'll take a model presented in words. I'll take a model presented in difference equations and a model presented in differential equations and translate them all exactly into system dynamics. And when possible, replicate famous figures in papers and books and stuff. And then people have a fighting chance of seeing thinker to thinker, model to model, theory to theory, how they're the same and how they're different. Do they have the same feedback loops? What's different or whatever. When you start doing difference equations, though, I just do it. I just do the difference equations. I use Stella. I use system dynamics software, and I figured out a way to do it. So you can still look at the feedback loops and what have you. But when you try and take a difference equation model and try and exactly translate it into differential equations, that's an age-old issue. If you go back to the 1950s with R.G.D. Allen or William Baumol, they both wrote books on mathematical modeling and economic dynamics. They do that in there. At the micro level, they'll take a cobweb model and do it with discrete time and continuous time. And they'll take, I'm trying to remember what macro models, they might be Samuelson's multiplier accelerator. And they show, and I've had some doctoral students working on this as well, that you can't really make them exactly. You can get close, but they're not, you can't just say, here's the identical discrete model presented in continuous time. It's tricky business to do that. And there are people not in economics and mathematics trying to figure out, is there a one-to-one relationship between a discrete time model and a continuous time model? And you get into all sorts of weird stuff. You know, a first order discrete time model can oscillate. A first order continuous time model cannot, differential equation model cannot oscillate. You need to have a higher order system. So there's weird. So that's the first thing that I do is if it's a discrete model, I'll just replicate it in discrete time and then look, but you can still look at the feedback loops and stuff like that. Yes, what I do is I'll start with this particular model that you're pulled up there. I'll start with the static traditional Keynesian cross model. and we'll solve it traditionally, like in all the textbooks. And then you'll say, all right, what if investment spending, animal spirits kick in and it goes up from 200 to 250, whatever, add any number of zeros after that you want, 200 to 250. And you recalculate everything, and the cross goes from here to here. It's a comparative static model. You have the prior equilibrium and then the after equilibrium, the before and the after. And, that's it. And what you don't see, you tell the students, is, hey, how did it get from here to here? These two equilibria. Now, you say, well, let's use dynamic modeling. Why did economists do the comparative static stuff? Because they said back in the day, undergraduates shouldn't have to learn differential equations or difference equations to take an introductory econ course. So all this comparative static stuff was created, right? And if you have a smooth transition from here to here, just kind of like in your first run, I think, who cares if it's static or dynamic? Samuelson came up with the correspondence principle to show the circumstances under which, there's no need for the dynamic model. The static gives you kind of the same answer, right? But then I say to the students, let's take that model and make it dynamic and make it do exactly to the number, exactly the same thing. So we do that, and you see the smooth transition from here to here. Okay, supply and demand are equal at the end, like you showed. But then you say, can anybody look at this thing and tell me, is anything weird here? And usually there's silence. And then you say, all right, let me give you a hint. Look at the stocks and flows. Is there anything weird about the stocks and the flows? And somebody will invariably say, isn't investment spending a flow? It's supposed to be a flow, but it's not. And if it's flowing, where is it flowing to? Capital. So can we fix that? And so then you take away the constant investment, the exogenous, and you make it a flow, changing the stock of the capital. And you say, well, what controls the flow? And you say, well, expected demand, and the capital output ratio would say, well, here's how much plant and equipment I need to meet this expected demand, right? And so you can form a loop, and that's your accelerator now, right? And then you can show now when you run it, when you go from here to here, it's not smooth. You're doing that, right? Oh, now we got a cycle. When you fix the stock flow structure, you have a cycle. It's not smooth. So now maybe there's a need for dynamic modeling, right? And then finally, you say, take a look at it now. What do you? And you can show it's the same as Richard Goodwin's and Bill Phillips and all these people that produce these, multiplier accelerator models. You say, tell me what you see, and you can get a kid to say, the plant and equipment isn't doing anything. You have a stock of output, but it's not. The machines aren't making any of the output. Isn't that weird? Like, yeah. So you say it's just a weird model. Now, in Keynes's defense, and it was a short run model. We're in the ditch. How do we get out? Short run by definition means plant and equipment is not changing, and it's a model. It's not real. So it's not like Keynes was an idiot or something like that. But when you start representing the static stuff dynamically, just by getting the stock flow structure right, you start to see some of these famous models are a little goofy.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how I approach it. And then, like I say, if it's a difference equation model, if it's Hicks or Samuelson's, I'll just literally reproduce it, and you get the difference equation. You don't get the smooth stuff. You get the.
What did I see here? A question from. So yes, what I did there is I cheated. My shock, I found a perfect optimization for my investment shock there, where if I ran it for 1,000 years, it would just oscillate the whole way through. If I lowered tau subscript I lower than, I think it was 4.6, then the oscillations would increase and it would become unstable, and eventually I'd hit infinity and Minsky wouldn't run anymore. If it was more than 4.6, then the oscillations would slowly peter out until it reached supply and demand equilibrium. I just kind of cheated there and found the range where it oscillated for a long time. to answer your question. I'll get back to more questions for Mike. Let's do that. Where are my questions? Where are we? We did the mathematical. How about this one? This one. Why does one person's spending become another person's income? I know this might be layman to you or me, Mike, but it's a relevant, topic on the accelerator and multiplier. Why does that happen, Mike?
Well, at the micro level, if I go and spend $10 at my local convenience store, the mom and pop who own it get some income. My spending is their income. At the macro levels, now we're talking like the household sector of the economy, right? And spending there adds to demand, and the overall demand in the system leads to plant and equipment, right? Investment spending. And C plus I plus G equals plus X minus M equals national output and equals national income, which is returned in the form of rent, profits, wages, rent, and a few other miscellaneous items. So in the aggregate level, it's not one person giving income to another person per se, like in my micro example, but it's aggregate demand, basically, is the short answer.
What's the intuition behind the propensity to consume? What was Keynes, flushed out argument in the general theory?
So he started with basically if you have Y equals C plus S. So household income is consumed or not consumed. In other words, consumed or saved. And so Y equals C plus S. If you divide everything through by Y, 100% of household income is the fraction of income spent plus the fraction of income saved. That's 100%, right? And then if you take the change in all that, you get the marginal propensity to consume and the marginal propensity to save. So the change in income is divided between changes in income and changes in spending. So that's the short answer. So the MPC, the marginal propensity to consume, is not 1, meaning the household sector doesn't spend 100% of its, of its income. It saves some fraction. And, the marginal propensity to save, which is 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume, is bigger in Japan than it is in Germany, which is bigger than in the US. Certain societies are more thrifty than other societies, right? So it depends on what country you're.
What's the effect of changing the MPC to kind of the strength of the multiplier?
Great question. So that's a classic Keynes thing. It's called the paradox of thrift, right? So, and he used this to illustrate what I was talking about before. Is why do we have macroeconomics? Because what is true for you or true for me or true for an individual firm or an individual household is not true necessarily for the system as a whole. So, for example, if you save more, good for you. If I save more, good for me. If we all save more, ceteris paribus, no other changes, you plunge the economy into a recession. So you'll be saving a higher fraction of a smaller GDP or a smaller GDI, smaller national income, because aggregate demand falls. Because saving is a leakage. It's not automatically reinjected into the system through investment like it is in the classical system. Because investment is due to animal spirits. It's not just because there's more saving in the system, which lowers the interest rate, the price of borrowing, and hence I'll go ahead and borrow more. That's severed. To Keynes, saving was the reward for the pain of being illiquid, not for the pain of not consuming. So it was a whole different mechanism.
So you mentioned leakages. How do leakages kind of affect the theoretical and real world multipliers?
So, okay, well, leakages from the spending stream are going to be things like saving. So you're unemployed, The government spends to build Hoover Dam. Now you're employed as a construction worker. You get a paycheck. First leakage is you save some of it. You don't spend it. So that's a dribble, a leakage from aggregate demand. So fewer barbers and t-shirt makers are going to be hired than they otherwise would because you're saving some. And that saving is not automatically re-injected into the system like it is in the classical system through the loanable funds market. Next, there might be an income tax that's taken out of your paycheck. So that's something you're not going to spend. And in a traditional Keynesian model, the tax revenue and even modern monetary it's just money that's extinguished. It's not automatically re-injected into the system. And then, the marginal propensity to import. You're going to buy French wine instead of California wine. Again, another leakage from the spending stream. So the bigger those leakages there are, the lower is demand in the domestic economy, in the macro system. And if demand is deficient, then companies aren't going to have orders in their pipeline, at least not as many. So they're maybe not going to push the button on new investment. Animal spirits will fall. And of course, investment adds to plant and equipment. It adds to the supply side, but it also adds to the demand side, right? So that's going to fall, and you can get into these spirals. This is what FC Domar did, right? Herod and Domar, it's often called the Herod-Domar model, arrived independently at the same model, right? And Herod was trying to generalize the general theory, right? Take Keynes to the long run. And Domar was noted that investment spending influenced both the supply side, plant and equipment, production capacity, and the demand side. Demand is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So what's the right amount of investment to keep the system growing in a stable fashion? And mathematically, they ended up being the same model. So that's why it's called Herod-Domar. But Domar noted that investment spending plays a dual role here. So it's on the supply and demand side. So when animal spirits are involved, which are, if you will, expectations of the future, which can be fickle, and it's influencing both sides of the macro system, it's very important, and lots of things can happen, right?
On a side note, so Keynes, says, terms animal spirits.
Mm-hmm.
Was that basically his way to simply say, the future's unknowable, random things occur, or was there another meaning behind it? Because he's often attacked for that from Austrians generally for using that term as if he didn't know what was going on. What was he really describing there, or what was he saying he couldn't describe? What was that all about? That term?
It's a great question, and of course, although I did talk to Mrs. Robinson, who helped him write the general theory, I never talked to Lord Keynes, so I'm just speculating here. But I think Keynes's doctoral dissertation was a treatise on probability theory. So Keynes was very much aware of the difference between risk and uncertainty. Risk, you can attach a probability distribution to something like an actuary does. What's the chance that Mike Radzicki's house will burn down or flood, or Ty Keynes will crash his car, or his car will be stolen, or whatever? Actuaries are trained to evaluate data and come up with, a probability from a probability distribution on that sort of thing and charge a premium accordingly, right? Uncertainty is very different. It's like, we just don't know, right? It's, and particularly with investment spending, which is the key. Investment is the key to Keynes. It's a fundamentally uncertain decision, because you're going to invest in plant and equipment, and by the time this stuff gets online, it gets, designed, approved, permitted, built, tested, and online. It could be 5 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever, right? And so you have to guess or believe that when that thing finally comes online, the widgets it produces are going to sell, right? Otherwise, it's crazy to build more capacity if you don't think you're going to be able to sell the stuff you make, right? So, but people go ahead and build new facilities or buy lines of equipment or whatever, or not, right? So what is it that makes them pull the trigger or not? Well, animal spirits are a fundamental call to action rather than inaction. So animal spirits are good. I'm going to go pull the trigger on that new line of equipment, on that new facility. And if animal spirits disappear, it's pessimistic. Something in the air has caused me to be pessimistic. Like, I don't know if I'm going to, that doesn't mean you're going to cancel it forever, but you're going to pump the brakes a little bit and say, I don't know what's going on. And it can be something as simple as a news item. A container ship gets wedged sideways in the Suez Canal, a pandemic, an orange crop freezes, an interest rate change overseas, whatever. It can be something that's just suddenly is there, and suddenly pessimism. Now, if you're an entrepreneur or manager and your animal spirits disappear, no big deal. If mine disappear, no big deal. If everybody's disappears, this is no good, right? So you see investment spending data is like this. Consumption spending data is smooth, right? It's because it's a very different set of decisions. Consumption, household sector spending for durable goods is a little more jagged because, again, that's spending like investment by the business community. It's spending that can be canceled, but really spending that can be postponed. If I'm like not optimistic, my animal spirits have faded or disappeared in the household sector, I don't know if I'll get my Christmas bonus. I'm hearing rumors at work that we might be put on furlough, whatever, right? I might not go buy that new car yet or that refrigerator, right? I might tap the brakes on that. So durables are a little more volatile, but with investment spending on giant projects and lines of equipment and whatever, if animal spirits disappear, right, you get this giant plunge in the business sector.
Gotcha. Interesting. Always like hearing that sort of stuff. So another question I got, and I heard this a couple months ago, and it was about the multiplier going negative, and that austerity could cause the multiplier to go negative. I want your opinion on that, because I thought about it yesterday when I was building that model, and I thought about, okay, what do I do? What happens if I introduce some negative values to some of my constants, just playing around like we do with dynamic systems? What's your thought on that?
Haven't really considered it. Of course, everybody in all the textbooks constrains the marginal propensity to consume to be between greater than 0 and less than 1, right? So the multiplier blows up if it's 1, you get 0 in the denominator and what have you. And then the idea, well, you're not going to consume nothing, right? You got to live. So if going negative, I don't know, but it's always so the short answer is I don't know. The longer answer that I think is relevant to what you and I and Steve Keynes do, Ty, is robustness testing of our models. So Jay Forrester taught us about making sure our models are robust and saying, a parameter will never be that value, so I don't care if it blows up my model is wrong. He would say, hey, if a parameter gets in some weird range, does your model do the right thing, including just everything shuts down, rather than some weird thing happens. So it's model robust. So we have, like in the Vensim software package, they have something called reality checks, where you can ask questions like, please look at my model and tell me if there's no grass in my model, are the deer still eating grass? And if they are, that's a flaw in the model, even though mathematically, and then you have negative grass or something, right? And Jay was, and to just say, well, I would never have no grass in my forest. Jay would say that's not good enough. You got to make it. It should be in the weird off chance that would happen, or just spitballing. Does the model do the right thing? So a negative multiple. I never really kind of thought about that, but.
Yeah, no, and I encountered in that model run where I introduced the shock, I noticed that investment went below 0. And so basically capitalists are taking hammers to their plants and stuff. And I thought about introducing like a max operator so it wouldn't drop below 0, but those are dangerous to use in in dynamic systems. So I just left it be a B. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
And the other thing with investment that's quite common is it really should be gross investment when we talk about it, as opposed to net investment, because you can have positive gross investment, but if it's lower than depreciation in currency terms or physical discards in physical terms, net investment will be negative, even if gross investment is positive. So in the traditional GDP thing, it's gross investment, but people kind of just throw that. So you can have negative net investment, right? Which is not taking. I hear what you're saying, taking hammers, but it would be just you have more discards and obsolescence and whatever than new stuff. New stuff coming in.
Gotcha. You kind of touched also on, pushing the ranges of your variables or your parameters, like Jay Forrester was saying. And if you're not making a robust model to handle those extreme ranges, you could possibly miss things if you have a very clever, let's say, DSGE model, which kind of, that's another micro founded model, and it's kind of off topic, but there's an example there where those models failed during the Great Recession. There's examples where the DSGE models failed during COVID to predict inflation because they weren't robustly tested for those extremes. I think that was interesting, and it kind of brings me to my next question: is how does private debt and credit creation interact with the multiplier in a modern sense? So what I put on screen, that model, it didn't have credit or anything like that, and I didn't create any, bounds or optimization to handle that. So I didn't make a robust model in that perspective. But just, with those things included, how does that affect the multiplier?
Yeah, I guess so. One of the criticisms that Steve always brings up is a lot of these traditional models don't have a financial sector, bankers and what have you in the system, and it changes things when you become sort of like Minsky would be called a financial Keynesian, right? When you include debt and what have you, things can change a great deal in these models. The models I've seen, like Steve's model, famous model, and so forth, I think really have an accelerator and not a multiplier, if I'm remembering correctly, in them. So when he starts adding the financial stuff, it's really affecting the accelerator, but not the multiplier, if I remember correctly. So, is there a multiplier process with financial, like debt and so forth in it? Yeah, you could put it in there, I suppose. The shorter answer, I haven't really off the top of my head, but I think the shorter answer is if there's either public and or private sector debt in your model with a multiplier in it, are there feedbacks from the debt to something else, right? If it's just a sort of scorekeeping mechanism, then there, no big deal. But if there's feedbacks, if the debt feeds back to change household consumption or whatever, then different story. But you're really getting away from, I don't mean you, but a person trying to build such a model. If they're trying to take, the Keynesian cross family of models leads to the ISLM model, right? The Keynesian cross family of models were created by Paul Samuelson for his textbook in 1947 by going backwards. He said, I can't start the kids with Hicks's ISLM model. I got to go backwards and start with just the household sector. So he invented the Keynesian cross family, and then you keep adding to it, and then you just get the ISLM model. And if you're trying to sort of horse that, because that has a multiplier in it, and whatever, yeah, you can put debt in there and stuff, I guess, but then what are the feedbacks? It doesn't really lend itself. With enough monkey wrenching, you can probably do it, but it would be much better to just start with a clean slate and say, I want to build a model that has the following stuff in it, right? And I think you would get a much better outcome than trying to, because you'd have a Franken model at the end, Frankenstein model, all these add-ons and epicycles and crazy things.
Well, at that, because Steve's not here, I guess in his defense, at that point, you would just end up with the Steve Keen model. His feedback loop was, you had your stock of debt. So this is the
Mhm.
extension to the Goodwin model. That stock of debt, obviously, you're servicing it with interest, which lowers profits. Right. And if profits are lower, then firms invest less and they're invest below their own past profits, which means they take out less debt. And then, of course, that oscillates back and forth. And eventually, because that's the third system state, instead of that nice predator prey oscillation that you see from the Goodwin model, you see a breakdown in that model. And what does Steve always call it? The intermittent route to chaos. There was the two
Yeah, it
sign.
oscillates a lot, then it kind of settles down, then it
Yeah.
picks up again. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we should really touch on what this multiplier is good for, and that's government spending. And
Ah,
so how does, the multiplier get affected through government stimulus? What's that process?
right. So this is an old argument in economics. You have the classical system and the Keynesian system that allegedly replaced it, right? And crucial to the Keynesian system is the multiplier process, as you're saying, and it depends on the parameters of the model as to how strong the multiplier is. So the more leakages you have from the system, the lower the multiplier process will be. Okay, so that's the first thing. And so then it becomes, that's theoretically. Empirically, you have to start econometrically estimating all the parameters to get a value for the multipliers. And of course, conservative laissez-faire economists will come up with their econometric estimates that the multipliers are barely greater than 1. So the government shouldn't be intervening in things. And of course, Keynesians will come up with econometric estimates for the parameters such that the multipliers are much bigger and stronger per dollar of government spending, let's say. So who's right or who's wrong? You get into what data did you use? What econometric technique did you use? What period of time did you use? Did you use quarterly data, annual data, all that stuff? And I don't think it's ever been resolved. But what you can say is, one of the things I showed the kids is the famous balanced budget multiplier, right? In a Keynesian system. This blew the socks off economists. I think it was in the 1940s, where they said, the classical system said, hey, you can, first of all, the classical system, as far as I know, I never had a government sector, because you didn't need one, right? You just had the business sector and the household sector.
Yeah.
But to the extent they thought about government spending, it was like, look, run a balanced budget unless in time of national emergency, like a war. Okay. Spend as much as you want, government, as long as you tax to pay for it. That was the classical system. And if you did that, if you think of about a production possibilities frontier, all you did was move along the production possibilities frontier if the government spent more or less, because you were just changing the mix of guns and butter in the system. More public sector goods, guns meant less butter, less private sector goods, and vice versa. So there was no economic government spending, just changed the mix of guns and butter. It didn't move the production possibilities frontier. Keynes showed, or the Keynesians who followed Keynes said, hey, if you do what the classicals are saying, go ahead and spend anything you want, but tax to pay for it. The balanced budget multiplier is not zero. It's zero in a classical system. There's no multiplier effect. The balanced budget multiplier in a Keynesian system is 1. You'll get a dollar for dollar expansion. The production possibilities frontier will move out. You'll have economic growth. Now, if you deficit spend, it'll move out way more through the multiplier, but it's still an expansionary fiscal policy to tax and then spend more to pay for it, to spend the same amount to pay for it. So that was like, when the economists who were, trained as classicals were first beginning to look at the consequences of what Keynes was saying, from my reading of papers from that era, whenever the hell I read those papers years ago. So it's interesting, because it was a Keynesian revolution. They were like the economists of that era, like, man, this is so different from what I was taught. And even Keynes himself talked about how hard it was to think differently from his teachers, Alfred Marshall, who got him into economics, Arthur Pigou, the big names of that era who taught him. And he says, I got to think differently than these guys who are like giants in the field, because their system can't possibly be right. I'm looking out my window every day and this damn he called it the great slump, is still there. It's not going away. It's not just a market correction. So this can't be right. My guys can't be right. But that's hard to do.
You kind of saw that inner conflict he had from his teachers in the general theory, where at some points you're reading it and you felt like, well, now he's just describing a classical system, even though he was actually critiquing it 20 paragraphs ahead. So you almost kind of saw that, that was built in, not as a fault to him, because I've been taught things in my teenage years that I still rigidly kind of hold on to, even though I've seen evidence to suggest otherwise. And so when I think about that analytically, I still have that old way of thinking drifting in. And I kind of, and a lot of other people have said this, you can kind of see that kind of come through in the general theory in a lot of ways. I don't know, something you've seen as well?
Yeah, I'll tell you a quick story. And this is from memory, so take it for what it's worth. I think it's accurate. So I was having dinner with Randy Ray and Jan Kregel. And now Jan Kregel's a post-Keynesian, was for years an economist at I think he was at the UN. But when he was doing his graduate studies, he was, I believe, at Rutgers. Rutgers had a thing with University of Cambridge. And so his teachers there, Paul Davidson and whoever else was there, I don't remember exactly, sent Jan Kregel to Cambridge to study with Mrs. Robinson. And as I remember the story that Jan was recounting to me, his first meeting, or one of the first meetings with Mrs. Robinson, he described what he wanted to do. And her response was, so you've read Marshall? And he's like, well, I know Marshall, but I haven't read it. And he was told, before you come here again, read Marshall, because you can't understand Keynes, the true Keynes, until you understand Marshall, because that's what Keynes saw and was railing against. And whether he ever really broke from Marshall is debated. But again, it was hard to do that. He was trained to think a certain way. Could you stop thinking about stocks and flows and feedback loops now? Like, get out of my head, get out of my head.
I'm thinking, when you say that, I think of Daniela Meadows. She said the same thing, when she got into systems thinking, that's all she saw everywhere from that point on, with stocks and flows. Yeah. Make sure everybody, you hit the like button. I've made a fancy new graphic for us. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all those fancy things. And if you have a question specifically for Mike, because I don't want to do the questions today, that means I have to think more. I'd rather just talk and yap. But if you got a question for Mike or me, put question or Q in the comments, and then I'll bookmark that. And at the end of the show, we will try to get to as many questions as possible. You talked about how the classical economists basically said, didn't consider government spending because the government spends and they tax an equal amount. You looked at it from the production possibility frontier, guns or butters. In a modern sense, mainstream economists, are they discounting these multipliers during times of crises? I mean, the fiscal multipliers. Do you think it's still discounted, the effect that, what fiscal policy can have on the economy? Because maybe they're still coming at it from that balanced budget perspective.
Well, yeah, I think, so I think people are either wired, I don't know if it's from birth, whether it's your environment, nature or nurture, but people are wired to be sort of laissez-faire, Marlboro man, self-reliant. The government should stay the hell out of my business, versus it takes a village. We have to work together. The government is a tool that can help take the sharp edges off of capitalism. and should be involved in the economic game. And so you're wired one way or the other, whether you're born that way or you grew up in a household. I have no idea, but I think economists and people who are interested in economics kind of are attracted to one sort of set of theories or the other. The details might differ a little bit, but they're either kind of in, the government needs to get involved here, or the government should stay the hell out of it, type of economics. The modern version of the classical thought process that you're asking about is, of course, the new classicals. This is Bob Lucas and Thomas Sargent and Neil Wallace, right? And all of the rational expectations people. And what they said was, Keynes was thinking about, as I said, I think last week, a negative feedback loops to stabilize economic systems, that capitalist systems are unstable, meaning they go up and down. How do we stabilize it? We're in the Great Depression, we're down. How do we stabilize it so it doesn't do that anymore? Well, the only entity with the wherewithal and the mandate to handle that is the state. So the government has to use its budget to stabilize things. And I think it was the same idea was behind the Bancor system in international trade. We need this entity to stabilize things, a buffer stock to stabilize things. So economic systems are unstable and you want to stabilize them. Lucas and the rational expectations people came up, and that led to lots of government intervention. It's argued that Keynes would be rolling over and like, I never said you guys should be doing, this amount of government intervention. Like Keynes never really wrote about food stamps and, income redistribution and that sort of thing. He was talking about really building private investment spending that would go away due to animal spirits disappearing should be replaced with public investment spending, like Hoover Dam and the Golden Gate Bridge and highways and stuff like that. I'm not saying Keynes would have been against, I have no idea what he'd been against, income redistribution and stuff like that, but I don't think he ever really wrote about it. So I think, let me see what I was saying. Lost my train of thought there for a minute. What did you ask me? Sorry about that.
So in contemporary economics,
sorry. Yeah. So that led to lots of government intervention, perhaps beyond, hey, let's just stabilize an unstable system. So the laissez-faire types came about and said, hey, we're getting our ears boxed here by the Keynesians. They're running Washington now, and we're all Keynesians now. What do we do about this? And so Lucas and Sargent and all those guys came around and said, you're thinking about the problem incorrectly. It's not about stabilizing an unstable system. It's a chess game between the public and private sector, that when government officials try to intervene to push the system in a direction they want, rational agents will know this and they will act to counteract the efforts of the public officials. So if you deficit spend purposely to try and increase aggregate demand, rational consumers, households will know that they're going to have to pay higher taxes later to pay off the debt. So they're going to reduce their spending. They won't spend the stimulus, and it'll counteract the efforts of the public officials to stimulate the economy. So it's this chess match between I know, but you know that I know, but I know that you know that I know, and this. So how are we going to maneuver around? That's what's going on. It's not trying to stabilize an unstable system. And they said Lucas said you can't even do it. That if you estimate the parameters correctly of a system, and then use that model to change policies, those parameters will change their behavior. So those parameters are no good anymore. So that's the Lucas critique, right? So he says that's the wrong way to think about it. You've got to think about this chess game. So this whole rational expectations revolution occurred, and they started winning the day. The laissez-faire types started winning the day. Now, of course, the new Keynesians came along and said, all right, we'll build models that have rational expectations in them and still show that Lord Keynes was correct. And that gets you into the sticky prices and the menu choice thing and what have you.
With the Lucas critique, is there a counter argument that, it can only be correct if the other side, the private sector, knows the model itself? They would have to have perfect information basically on the model itself to adjust their behavior. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's well, this is in the United States. The Congressional Budget Office scores a spending bill, and they use static scoring. They assume nobody changes their behavior in response to a tax cut or a tax increase or what have you, because they say we don't know exactly how they're going to change their behavior. I don't know that the argument is that they got to know the model, but rather just they're going to change their behavior. So whatever parameter you had, their marginal propensity to consume is 0.9. It's not going to be 0.9 after some government change. The government does some change. That's the argument. So whatever your model was showing will be the result here will be incorrect, right? But yeah, I suppose if everybody had a real macro model in their head, it would be, if all my students had a macro model in their head, let alone the rest of the public, it would be great. So
Is there a way, with the fiscal multiplier, is there a way to actually show when fiscal stimulus fails? Can you derive some ideas from the multiplier itself of why it failed, or is that not a possibility?
well, if you're going theoretically, it's the more leakages from the spending stream there are, the weaker and weaker the multipliers are going to be, right? So, that's, maybe that period, end of statement. The more you make it desirable and easy to buy imported goods, the bigger the marginal propensity to import is going to be, the smaller, right then and there, the smaller your fiscal spending multipliers are going to be. You're going to be helping the economy of France or something rather than or China or something. Right?
Interesting. So just for transparency here, I basically did 50% questions for Mike, 50% questions for Steve, and I'm starting to get into the Steve questions. But, maybe you can chime in on this. And I had one, about, the post 2008 crash and post COVID recoveries. What would they teach us, about the multiplier effects in practice? I don't know if you could chime in a little bit on that.
Well, if first thing is you get into the whole idea of secular stagnation after the Great Recession, right? So has there been a fundamental shift in the trend in the economy, not just our economy, but the rest of the world as well? So, that was a big it's like, kind of like the Great Depression, a big shock to the system that might have changed things. In terms of the multipliers and things, I guess the secular state, because if you look at the data, that you can clearly see it. It's a function of maybe there's not enough of saving that's generated to generate investment, to generate productivity, to increase the trend rate of growth in the system. But that's perhaps more due to retirement and aging than anything else. The Great Recession, I think, put a lot of people out to pasture, whether they wanted to be or not. Some people just said, forget about it, I'm done here. You got the boomers. It coincided with the baby boomers really beginning to retire. So as soon as you've got lots and lots of retired people, that changes the dynamics because they have very different consumption needs and saving needs and what have you. So I hadn't really thought a lot about that. I'm sure Steve would have some thoughts about that.
Oh, Steve's always got some thoughts on conventional economics and a sharp-edged response.
Yeah. So the Great Recession was really a speculative bubble, in my view, right? Generated by a speculative bubble, which was really generated by the internet bubble, right? So what happened, of course, in 2000, 2001, everybody was in a fervor over this new internet thing, the World Wide Web, and all these e-businesses that were coming online. They weren't earning anything, but people were investing like crazy in these things. And you had the big bubble, and then it burst. So in my view, what happened was after the recovery, so we're into 2003, 2004, people have regrouped. They said, I'm not going to invest in stocks anymore. That's too risky. Look what happened last time. But I want to invest some of my excess funds. I don't want to just bury them in my yard in a jar. What am I going to invest in? Real estate. And you started another bubble. And it was helped not just by that, but of course by the government in the U.S. anyway, trying to provide housing or make the ability to buy a house available to people who otherwise wouldn't have qualified. So they loosened up the rules and said Freddie and Fannie would cover it and sort of smear the risk in the financial markets with new derivative products. And that the banks are like, hey, I don't have to service the mortgage. I package them up and get rid of them. So no big deal. And you had malfeasance with mortgage originators that also, they just got paid for originating mortgages. And in some cases, they're falsifying the data and whatever just to get paid. So it was more than just people saying, hey, I'd like to invest when I'm not spending, and I'm gun shy about stocks. There were other actors that contributed, both public and private sector, to the bubble. But of course, when that popped, that was very bad, because for a lot of people, their biggest asset is their home, right? And so you had what economists call a wealth effect, right? I'm feeling fat and sassy when I look at the postcard I got in the mail today, where a real estate agent wants to buy my house for 3 times what I paid for it. So I'm going to go ahead and buy that new truck. When it goes this way and the bubble bursts, you're like, whoa, no good. So I think with multipliers, this, I don't know. Certainly the Fed was doing quantitative easing and knocking down the 10-year treasury to stimulate mortgages. I'm trying to remember all the spending. They were bailing out banks left, right, and up and down. And there were stimulus checks from, was it George Bush Jr., I think at the time. There's a whole lot happening simultaneously. So I don't know on net, what caused what, or what the effect of whatever was, because there was just a whole mess of stuff.
Let's get into some questions from the chat. First one, this is again a Tony statement, but it might be something to dig in for Mike. And what Tony's essentially saying is, hey, Ty, there's macroeconomics before Keynes. The first legal tax system was macroeconomics. Now, to that, I would argue, I think Keynes formalized an aggregate economic system, and he was really the first to foundationally formalize it. And sure, there was aggregation throughout time, but Mike, do you have any historical indications that there was a form of macroeconomics before Keynes?
No. So this is interesting, Mesopotamia and Hammurabi. So I've heard those words before. I'm not real up on the details of that. Tony's a smart guy, though. So I'm not going to dispute him. Yeah, I would agree with you, Ty, that in the sense of a sort of a self-contained system created by a real economist for real economists, Keynes was the first. But I'm sure there's lots of writings out there where you could interpret them as kind of somebody having an idea for some kind of macro system, a systems approach. We talked about Keynes in the past here, the physiocrats, their value came from the land, but they had a closed system with some feedback loops and things. So maybe that was a macro, depends on how you want to think about it, I guess.
Yeah. And I completely agree. No doubt we were thinking in aggregation long before Keynes, but I think the credit is due for Keynes opening up the scientific kind of pursuit of aggregation or macroeconomics. And I think the credit is deserved to him. What else do we have here? Here's one that I don't know what he's talking about. but he always watches our show, so I got to give it. Optimal foraging theory has net energy intake per unit of time maximized. Similarly, could animal spirits be reinforcing the inability to achieve profit from an investment in the capital stock? I was thinking about that question when it came up, and I'm not smart enough, Mike. So I want you to try to take a stab at it. And if you
So,
can't, and you look bad, then we're equals, Mike, and I'm okay with that too.
looking bad is humbling. It's fine. I teach undergraduates, so it happens every day. So what leaps to mind as I read this is agent-based modeling. So we go back to the old Sugarscape model. And Ty, I don't know if you're familiar with the old Sugarscape model, but it's a little economy where the agents are foraging for sugar. And a lot of these algorithms, either in agent-based model or even in optimization routines, like parameter optimization routines, you don't do a brute force. Let's look at every single combination of everything, because even a supercomputer would take centuries to look at every possible combination. So you use, some randomness to jump around, and you forage for a better parameter value, more optimal solution to the objective function, or getting more sugar, or whatever the case may be. And then if it's not working well, you leap over here and you try over here. And there's some positive feedback loops. I'm trying to remember, they're flocking algorithms where, like crows, when they fan out, one crow finds food, they go, and all the other crows come. So if they find more sugar or a better parameter space, you start searching over there. So there's various aspects like that algorithmically. The inability to achieve profit from investment in the capital stock. In some sense, I suppose we forage for good investment opportunities. In Minsky's world and Steve Keynes' world, you cherry pick the good ones at the beginning, but you're euphoric and you keep doing it until you're in the speculative mode and all that. But so I guess that I've just kind of awkwardly given a stream of consciousness reaction to that. But as soon as we're talking optimal foraging theory, sounds like somebody's pretty smart and coming from numerical analysis or engineering or something to our little live stream here. So Delatorre might want to elaborate on what he or she means. I'm not sure if it's a lady or a man.
Yeah, data lore elaborates some more.
We'll
Always here. I don't know if it's a guy or a gal or not. It's kind of hard to tell with YouTube names, but we know Frank. Frank is a man. He's a baseball fan. He's a Blue Jays baseball fan too. I believe he is a Canadian, and Blue Jays game 1 against LA tonight. Woo! It's gonna be fun. Woo! I'm excited for that. We're underdogs up here in Canada, but I think they're underestimating the Vladster and underestimating.
I think it's great. I'm rooting for the Blue Jays, because it would be cool to have World Series champions up in Canada. A little bit different. Make it a true World Series. Not just U.S. series.
That's true. I think it's exciting. I actually so. Mike, we're a little off topic here, but growing up here in the Pacific Northwest of Canada back in the 90s, we didn't get all the channels. So I didn't get Blue Jays baseball. I got Mariners baseball. So I was a Mariners
that would
fan.
make sense. Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know if you remember Ken Griffey Jr.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. Alex Rodriguez started his career in Seattle in the mid 90s. Jay Buhner, Randy Johnson. So that was my introduction to baseball. And Joe Carter of the Blue Jays hit the World Series home run a year or two before. So I knew, I'd watch, that was on TV, and that was my introduction to baseball, was that World Series with the Blue Jays and Philadelphia Phillies. So
Well,
coming all this time later as a Mariners fan as a child, and now that I've got my Sportsnet package, kind of like ESPN down in the States, I get all the games. I can watch the Blue Jays. They're both 1977 expansion teams, and they finally faced off in the American League champ. And I was a bit torn, but I was Blue Jay side of things at that point. So for me, it brings back a bit of my childhood, and it's been a fun playoff season for me in baseball
yeah,
to
yeah.
watch it.
I remember when, because I grew up in Wisconsin, the Seattle Pilots became the Milwaukee Brewers when Bud Selig moved them to Milwaukee, like 1970, when I was a kid. And but then the Brewers were in the American League, and they used to
Yep.
play Toronto all the time. We go to Brewers
Yep.
games all the time, and Boston and what have you. And then I moved out to New England for work, but then they switched to the National League, and now the Brewers' big rival is the Cubs, and that throws me off because my mental model is not that, But
Yeah, so who else? They switched. The Astros used to be in the National League, swapped them
right.
over to the
Yeah,
American League.
yeah,
So now they are pretty big rivals. Now I've noticed online the Seattle and Houston fan bases are neck and neck with each other all the time about cheating scandals in 2017, and
yeah,
of course Springer got hit in Game 5 in Seattle, and then hit his basically game-winning home run in Toronto a few days later. Lots of storylines, been really exciting. Anyways, Frank, I like doing one-on-one chats with Mike too.
So, yeah, what I would ask Frank or the audience in general is, what would they like to see? Would they want to see some modeling done? Like, because when we're talking, it's not entirely clear to me when I say, well, I have a stock, I put a feedback. What's in their minds? Do they understand what we're saying, or does it matter? Even if they're not entirely clear, they want the bottom line. They don't want to see the ugly details of a model
I
or
think
whatever.
I think I can answer. Well, I shouldn't answer for them, but I think they appreciate you, Mike, for your systems thinking perspective, because I think it's the fringe few that would enjoy the modeling. I found, starting my YouTube channeling, people didn't really, I get, 50 to 100 views doing a full modeling tutorial. And I think, wow, this is great. I would watch this myself. But that's for the dorks like me and you. However, I think you'll see Daniela Meadows videos do really well on YouTube, because it's not about the math, it's about the systems thinking, causal loop diagram. So maybe
Yeah.
causal loop diagrams are interesting. And I think that's why they appreciate you, Mike, is because you come from that solid system thinking background.
Yeah. So when we do an intervention, and we're starting a consulting project here in Central Mass, in the insurance business. We got a company approach us, and we just had a meeting with their C-suite people, and they're kind of like, okay, what exactly do you do? They're an international company, and the big cheeses over in Europe told the second level big cheeses to do this. And so they contacted us. The big cheeses in Europe like system dynamic. I have no idea how they heard about it, but so we went down to do a initial getting to know you thing, and what do you want, and what can we do for you, and whatever. At any rate, our traditional way of doing system dynamics, intervention when somebody has a problem, as opposed to, Ty, you're sitting at home building a model about something you know about, or adding to your model or whatever. That's a different story. But if you go into a setting where there's, let's say, a half dozen experts, we talked about earlier, you ask them, well, what do you do all day? They can tell you, right? They know a lot about their business or whatever the system is, and why there's a problem. So you get them to tell you, what's the problem? We're not going to model the system. We're going to model a problem from a systems perspective. So that means we're not going to make a digital twin. We're going to exclude a bunch of stuff. Only the relevant stuff, relevant to the problem. That's number one. Number two, let's make your problem statement dynamic. I don't want to know that Pearl Harbor happened on December 7th, 1941. time shapes of the pressures leading up to December 7th, 1941. So let's make a dynamic picture of your problem statement. And then we're going to say, all right, tell me, why do you think that those dynamics, that problem is happening? And people who do it every day, all day, can tell you. Now, they might be wrong, but they can tell you a story, a narrative that, well, first we did this and this happened and blah, blah, blah. And with a little bit of a systems thinking ear, you can start to lay out a causal loop diagram. You can start to map out the structure of, at least in their minds, what is causing the problem. And that then they're taking ownership of the model. It's not my model that I'm going to drop in on them on the last day. It's their model, and I'm just the medium. I'm the middleman who's moving the mouse and taking what I'm hearing. But you're always checking back and saying, do I got this right? Is this what you're telling me? This is what I'm hearing. Do I got this right? And it's really interesting. So without writing equations or even going to Ravel or Stella or any of that stuff, just making some basic causal loop diagrams, a feedback loop or two, can often be insightful for people. Then you're kind of saying this is what Dana Meadows used to do. And yeah, it's depending on the audience, that might be enough right there to stimulate their thinking, right? And see the world a little bit differently.
Yeah, and it is the bridge between people that maybe aren't so interested in the math. It's a surface level of the math in a system dynamic model, causal loop diagram. And another thing I really like, which you mentioned, is a dynamic evolution of a problem. How did we get there? And I guess we would call that path dependent modeling. That's why I think people get hooked to system dynamic modeling, is because you get to see the system evolve and behave. It's like an engineer that's studying a machine and he builds a feedback model of it. That stuff just makes them drool. And I don't drool over system dynamic modeling, but it does tickle me in a certain way that I really appreciate.
So what we find in when we go out to do consulting engagements is that the C-suite managers we speak with, if they come from engineering or natural science, like they come from physics, electrical engineering, or whatever, to the C-suite, they absolutely get what we're trying to say with system dynamics. So electric utilities, a lot of the top people were electrical engineers first, and then they rose through the ranks. Or defense contractors, Electric Boat, Raytheon, places like that. Or, any of the high-tech kinds of companies. The automotive business, you often have automotive engineers that rise to the C-suite. They get it when you say, like you're saying, we're going to write equations capturing what you do, then simulate and whatever. They're like, oh yeah, we do that for chemical processes. We do that for, whatever. They don't think anything weird about that. But the worst is when you've got business folks or government officials, and they come from finance, accounting, marketing, management. To them, model equals spreadsheet. And all they hear, it doesn't matter what you're saying, feedback loops, they hear spreadsheet. And they think we have computers full of spreadsheets, so I'm not seeing what you're going to do for me. When they hear data equals numbers to these people. It doesn't necessarily mean mental information. Tell me what you know, and I can put it into a model. So it's very hard for getting those people to understand what you're trying. And then they don't want to necessarily see you whip out software and start writing equations either. They're normally not necessarily tools people. So it's difficult to get people to value the kind of modeling we do when they're coming from certain backgrounds. They just don't seem to get it. And unless they're willing to sit still long enough and say, well, let me give you a tutorial here and I'll show you some examples. It's very hard to get them on board to take what you're doing seriously.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's my same experience. My last contract I got about 2 weeks ago. he wasn't really a spreadsheet guy, actually. He saw, I guess, some tutorials of mine, and like me, and probably like you, seeing those graphs evolve over time, seeing counter feedback loops, overshoot and collapse scenarios, really like, oh wow, the what I have in my head is what he does and how he models. And so he wasn't infected by the spreadsheet view in his mind.
Mhm.
So I agree with you. If there's already a preconceived idea about data collection, it's a spreadsheet stuff, it becomes harder to sell the method, I think, a little bit. And one person that would be interesting to ask is one of your former students. We've had him on the show a million times. He has a great mullet, and I can't think of his name off the
Tim
top of
Tim
my head.
Clancy.
Yes, he's in the consulting business,
Yeah.
so he would have encountered these scenarios many times before. Let's get to some more questions. Also, look at me as a homeless person. Like, if my hair is a little disheveled, if you want to give me a super chat, I'll definitely answer your question first. Uh, I put a goal today because Mike, my channel got monetized last night,
Oh, good for
which
you.
is great. Yeah, we've done enough fuckery on our live streams that I can now bag for money. So if you and we got our first super chat today. I put a goal of one super chat for $5 American or Canadian. So I've got
Okay.
the British pound, so I'm over $5. I met my goal and exceeded it. But if you want to do that and ask a question, you'll definitely get to the front of the list. But we do have another question that's worth answering, and that is from Econ Ben. Why do you suppose there's so little heterodox microeconomics like health, urban, labor economics? Why is all heterodox economics macro? I would disagree that all of it's macro, but Mike, chime in, give an answer.
Well, Steve was mentioning last week Fred Lee, who sadly has passed away, but he was a sort of a post-Keynesian institutionalist who was writing a book on price theory, but post-Keynesian price theory, markup pricing, and all the stuff that happens in the real world. So there are economists who are doing that. A lot of heterodox economists are non-mathematical. So they're sort of case study narrative people. Rich descriptions of what, think of in some sense in modern times, John Kenneth Galbraith, a wonderful writer, vivid descriptions, the new industrial state and what have you. But he wasn't writing equations, right? And so when you get into kind of, is that microeconomics? When his view of the, price makers versus price takers, his vivid description, is that micro, or because it's not mathematical, it's not? So I think I agree with Ty that there are heterodox economists who are, looking at industrial structures, firm structures, and what have you, often not mathematically, and maybe that's the reason. But there are some people who, like Fred Lee, who are trying to make sort of the equivalent of neoclassical micro from a heterodox point of view. Finally, Steve and I go around on this one. When we do system dynamics, as I was taught it, as Jay Forrester did, when you build a household sector, a macro model with a household sector, the household sector is supposed to look like a household, have the same decisions as a household would, even though it's a household sector. The firm sector would have all the stuff that a firm would have, an accounting sector, a marketing sector, and what have you. So Jay always said it was macro behavior from micro structure, and I know that rubs Steve the wrong way. But I think just two ways of running the railroad. I don't think we're that much in. I think Steve's model's way of doing it is simpler and not simple. They're complicated and can generate complicated behavior. But when you have entire accounting sector in a firm sector with balance sheets and income statements and what have you, it starts to get, it's a lot going on.
Yeah, no. So in Steve's modeling, and in his papers, he's basically does the simplifying assumption that all income is used to consume, and it is his generalized Minsky model. I have showed him my national economy where I have a household sector, and it's a little more complicated than Keynes's propensity to consume, but I have a time constant based on the aggregation of checking deposits in the economy, and I also have a component where their equity, so their wealth, will change the way they consume over time. And I tested that against data, and it was a pretty reliable consumption. Like you were saying earlier, is really easy to model because it's quite stable, and it is quite closely tracked to bank balances. Interest rates do change it, but it's changing the bank balance. It's not actually changing consumption. So now people have to pay more on their capital goods or their homes via interest payments. It lowers their bank account. And obviously, if you add like a simple time constant to the bank account, that's going to change what the consumption pattern is. So I think he's amenable to everything you say, Mike. I just don't. I think he's too old and doesn't give a fuck at this point in life. But no, I agree. I agree with you saying. Next question would be, okay, this goes back to what we were talking about, capitalists smashing their factories. Can't negative investment be seen as cashing out of the sector? And I think Mike and we were talking about actual real capital investment, not financial asset investments.
Yeah.
So I would, from an asset perspective, yes, you can deleverage, deinvest. I don't know if that question was actually about capital investment. When I talk about that in my tweets and stuff on the internet, I often get the finance people coming in there and they're like, "What are you talking about?" I'm talking about like real investment, like buying a factory and stuff.
Yeah, I can tell you. I've even been at the American Economic Association meetings in a room all full of professional economists, and somebody will be making a presentation and talking about capital, and finally somebody will raise their hand and say, "Stop, please stop. Will you please define capital? Do you mean financial capital, plant and equipment, human capital? You're throwing it around without a good definition, and I'm not following." And same thing with investment, financial investment, gross investment, net investment. You got to define your terms sometimes, because the same term means different things to different people. Like negative feedback to some people means getting scolded or getting criticized. It doesn't mean what we think in terms of a negative feedback loop. So sometimes you just got to pump the brakes and define terms.
Yeah. And so for me, and I think this goes for you and anybody who's watching in the future, generally when Steve, Mike, or myself are talking about capital, specifically, we're talking about the fixed capital of a nation. So that includes factories, machines, et cetera, stuff that can generate output for an economy. Often when I talk about investment, I'll try to nuance it with net financial investment. So if we're talking about MMT, I try to make sure, okay, this is net financial gains for the private sector, as opposed to real investment, which is a real good. But I understand the confusions there. So his name is YouTube Channel for All. What a great name. My YouTube channel is for all as well. Sorry for the confusion, and I will make sure I'm a little more descriptive in the future. Here's a statement question from Data Lore again. Beyond demand, expected profitability seems to be important for investment in the capital stock. Steve's model, basically, in Goodwin model, there was only a function for the wage change. Steve added a function for investment, saying if profits are higher, firms will invest more and more. So a very Minskian, euphoric exponential curve, and eventually they'll invest beyond their profits and have to take out credit. So I agree that's a reasonable assessment. And in fact, profitability is demand itself. right? People have more demand, they buy more things, firms become more profit. So it might be one and the same. Mike, anything to add?
Yeah, this comes up sometimes in system dynamics forums, like, hey, who can tell me the best way to model this, that, or the other? And all the veterans will weigh in, do it this way, and somebody else say, no, do it that way. So when you get into the people who do system dynamics modeling for consulting, and they're looking at asset allocation, for example, the clients will always want to see your standard sort of net present value calculations, return on investment, the stuff you learn in business school and MBA programs. And some of those functions are canned in system dynamics software because it just is used so much in that space, because that's supposedly what managers do when they're trying to say, hey, are we going to invest in this new line of equipment or in a shopping mall, looking at these net present value calculations or whatever. And so you can do that. I don't believe Steve has ever done it, or Kleski ever did it, but it can be done, and it is done depending on who the client is and what they want to see.
Here's a clarification for YouTube channel for all, which now, okay, I'm understanding where you're coming from. I was actually thinking about selling a factory, possibly even at a loss, and cashing out that way. I often remind people, here's an example: initial public offerings of stock or equity is very important to a company. The secondary sale of that stock is really important to the markets, but that actually doesn't generate anything for the company other than maybe some fictional equity gains and stuff. So it's really important, the initial purchase of that factory, but if it's resold on the secondary market in a macroeconomic sense, you can say there's no gain. It's just now another company's going to run that factory, maybe at less efficiency or more efficiency, but there's no net gain. But now I understand what you're thinking. Maybe Mike disagrees with me on what I just said, but your thoughts, Mike?
Well, that's absolutely true about initial public offerings or resales, 100%. Yeah, any of these things can be modeled. The way I guess I'm thinking about this, a follow-up question is that when you're working with somebody and you're the modeler and they're not, but they know a lot, they have the domain knowledge, you get into this exactly what's happening here. What I was actually saying, or what I meant to tell you, or what you're not hearing, is as follows. In this iterative process of identifying what the domain expert knows and accurately representing it in a model is crucial to getting a good model, and B, having the client use the model and have some confidence in it, right? So clarifying what do we mean by terms and what have you. And there's different ways to do the same thing. So you might have an outflow of a stock of firms where firms are being cashed out. And you say, is that what you mean? Or we're talking about a firm sector and a firm cashing out, or an individual firm shutting down, going through bankruptcy or sale or whatever it is, and the dynamics associated with that. Very different kinds of models. I mean, broadly similar. But again, it depends on, what are you telling me? What do you want to see? What's the problem, and what have you?
Great stuff. We're at the top of the second hour, or bottom of the second hour. It's been great, Mike. This has been fun. What we're going to do from now on is do it an hour later. Maybe that's more amenable to your schedule. And even if Mike can't join right away, he'll pop in, 15, half an hour later, and we'll start with Steve. But this is great to have you from top to bottom. It's a whole lot of fun.
Yeah. I'll be always a little bit late. I have 85 kids this term in macro, right immediately preceding this. And by the time I answer, they all shuffle up after class, ask me questions, and hand it. I always give a short quiz at the end of each class to see if they were listening. Very modest, but they get a few points. I got 85 pieces of paper floating around, and I got to make sure and they don't put them in any sort of order when they hand them in. There's this giant mess. So by the time I wrap all that up, answer their questions, and maybe get a cup of coffee, because I've been talking for 2 hours, it's going to be maybe 10 minutes late or 5 minutes late or whatever. Not huge late, but I'll need a couple of 3 minutes to.
What's the average age for the students you're teaching?
In this term, it's probably 19.
Holy
In-
shit! There is going to be no adherence to an organized, orderly fashion in your classes.
No. The in D term, when you got seniors desperately trying to graduate, they're just fulfilling a social science requirement. They're all like 22, 23, and they just want to get the hell out and graduate. So they're jaundiced. They've been here for 4 years. They just want to get their degree and get the hell out. And so it's a very different, even though they're all undergraduates. At the beginning of the year, it's kids who look like they're in high school. They all look like they're 12 to me. And then on the way out, it's like, yeah, these dudes are going to industry now and they're sick of school and they just want to get the hell out of here.
Good times. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next week. It'll be the same time. If you're on the East Coast, it'll be 2 p.m. If you're in London, that is 7 p.m. And if you're in Europe, that is 8 p.m. And if you're here on the West Coast, the good coast, the clean coast, that's 11 a.m. So we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
You are now relearning economics.